Hi, friends. Welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 258. I'm so glad you're here today because I had the opportunity to interview someone whose work I followed for years and years and years, Dr. Deborah Ruff of the 5 Levels of Gifted. And you are going to really enjoy this episode. There's so many different things to pull out of it. If you are the parent of a gifted or twice exceptional kiddo or one who is suspected of being that, you are not going to want to miss this episode because there's just so much wisdom. Special shout out and thanks to our sponsors for this episode, Lexercise and CTC Math. We appreciate you both so very much. You'll hear more about CTC later on in this episode, and you'll hear about Lexercise in just a minute right before we get on with it. So get out something to write on, and if you don't have anything to write on, just remember to go to the show notes for this episode after the fact because there is so much here that you are going to want to remember. It'll all be in the show notes. If you don't have a chance to remember it or take notes right now, you can go back and read the show notes, check out the resources, and then follow up. All right, pop those earbuds in. Let's get on with today's episode right after this word about our sponsor, Lexercise. Are you a homeschooling parent with a child struggling with reading, writing, or spelling? Lexercise can help. Their online platform offers self-paced learning and expert instruction customized to your child's needs, all based on the Orton Gillingham approach. We used Lexercise back when Logan was first diagnosed with dyslexia when she was, 8 or 9. And oh my goodness, the personalized support they gave us, the attention to detail, the program itself was just incredible. And Logan grew leaps and bounds. I'm so proud to have them as a sponsor for the podcast right now because more people need to know about their services. You can join thousands of families who have seen effective results, including mine, and have unlocked their child's love of learning. Visit Lexercise.com/learners for a free learning disabilities screener and to learn more about their programs. Check them out and let me know what you think. Ask me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them or direct you to my contacts at Lexercise. But if you have a kiddo who struggles with reading, writing, or spelling, you definitely want to check out Lexercise.com/learners and see what they can offer you. All right, let's get on with today's episode. I am super excited to be here today with someone whose work I have followed for decades, Dr. Deborah Ruff, the author of The 5 Levels of Gifted and so many other things. And this is just, so I'm going to geek out for just a quick second because this is just one of those moments for me. I've had a couple guests throughout the years on the podcast that I've looked up to forever. And Dr. Ruff is just one of them. And it's just an honor to have her here. And there's so many things, so many directions this conversation can take, and so many things that we all can learn from her. So at the end of this, I really hope that you all go out and look her up, find her resources if you haven't already, and buy her books. But in the meantime, let's get on with this conversation. Dr. Ruff, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, this is exciting for me. Okay, so before we even get started, for those who are listening who maybe haven't come across your work before, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just give us a little background on you?
I'm one of those fellow gifted people who thought she was retiring. I decided, what's retirement? So I'm still writing, I'm still conjecturing and writing about it. But I started wanting to be a teacher, and I did teach school. And I'm a fellow Ohioan by birth and went to Ohio Wesleyan. What I did is, okay, I'll move from being a teacher to a principal. Well, I'm not the kind of person who knows how to work with people to get them to do what I want. I'm somebody like, here it is, you know what to do. And if they don't, I wouldn't be a good principal anyway. The point is, I taught school for 7 years and I did tons of differentiation and talking to the other teachers at my grade levels where I was working and telling them we should group our kids because it wasn't natural to group the kids there. So I was shocked when I had kids and they started school, and that was in North Dakota where they started school. There was no differentiation, there was no grouping. And I thought, I can't handle this. This is terrible. And I tried writing a few letters to the administrations at every level, and they just thought I was awful to even bring it up. I think I wasn't as prudent in my language selection back then. I think I referred to it as lockstep cookie cutter. But I started to homeschool as a result of being in a system that absolutely wasn't meeting the needs of my kids because they all taught themselves to read before they went to school. And I wasn't pushy. I hate flashcards and worksheets that aren't fun. And so I actually like worksheets when they're good worksheets. But that's how I got started. And I still didn't realize I might be gifted. So, like many in the audience, I'm sure, it didn't occur to them they were either, or they knew they were, but. And so I cried over Barbara Clark's I think it was called Growing Up Gifted. And it was a textbook. I'm geeky. And so I'm reading this textbook that somebody had recommended. And I cried because I had the realization that, oh, this explains a lot about my journey through schools. And I had a mother who was also really smart, and she wanted me to be normal. And so apparently I was offered opportunities to be in a special school for gifted, but she turned them down because she wanted me to be normal. If being really depressed is normal, it was a good move on her part. But I did learn a ton from being around everybody. And so part of what I encourage in my writing is to make sure you give the children chances to interact on every level because life is like that, but not in math class, not in philosophy class. You have to have true peers as well as age mates and people that challenge you in different ways. So that's how I got the start. And I went back to school because I wanted to know even more. And I didn't go back to my doctorate until I was 36. And it took me 10 years because I had 3 kids at home and I was homeschooling them and I was doing this and doing that. So that's the essential way I got started.
Love that. And it's such a common thread, like you said, that comes up between in conversations with anybody who's discovering about their kids, especially now, right? There's a lot more information out there. And as we start to read more and more about our kids, we start to see ourselves come up through the conversation. We learn so much about ourselves. I'm sure you've experienced this too in working with people throughout the years that there's oftentimes this guilt that you missed it because you just thought that's how things were. So you feel this guilt in how you've raised your kids to this point. But then there's also this sense of loss that you missed out on things and reconciling that. I like to tell parents, you don't know what you don't know. So you just move on from here. But so many of us learn about ourselves through our discovery about our kids because apples don't fall far from trees, right?
Absolutely. And that is part of what I wanted to learn in my doctoral program. I didn't major in gifted. I knew how to learn what I wanted to learn and they let me. It's at the University of Minnesota. It was great because I went into test and measurement, learning and cognition, and I wanted to know what's true about where intelligence comes from.
It's
And
fascinating.
yeah, how much of it is heritable, how much of it is environmental. And it's been a real journey because my background had fooled me as much as it had fooled a lot of other people about a lot of things having to do with our intelligence and our final results. And I do want to add one other thing. One of my very first conferences I went to, and I was fortunate, I could afford to go to one in Vail during the summer, and Jim Delisle was there. And I was sitting around a pool in our regular clothes. We weren't there swimming. And there were these two women from Florida who were teachers and wanted to know more about gifted. And he was there and I was there. And that might have been it for the conversation. And they said, tell us, how do we know when somebody's exceptionally gifted? And he didn't miss a beat. And he said, take Deborah, for instance. And I almost fell off my chair because that was such news to me. And it was real, transformational to have somebody I respected say that. And that was part of the problem. When you are really highly to exceptionally gifted in particular, people will say you're smart, and you think, yeah, what do they know? I know I'm smarter than you, but that doesn't really mean anything. No, but it really was an internal thing that was going on. And it's important to be modest, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that. So when he said that, I had to put that into my whole scheme of how things work. And I know you're a fan of Jim Delisle, so I thought you'd like that story.
Yeah, I love that story. I Jim is so intuitive and can just cut to the nitty and the gritty like right away. And that's one of the things that I've loved for years about him. People who are listening to this podcast, he's been on the podcast and know that he was my mentor in my grad program. And
I love you.
I am. I can't tell you. So before, I don't know if much about like reading professors and things like that, but before I switched to my master's in gifted, I worked with Tim Rosinski, who is like Jim Delisle in the reading world. And so I have been so fortunate to be able to work under some really great minds, and it's opened mine up. I want to talk about what you said there with regards to your studies, just learning about cognition and how that nurture versus nature debate comes up all the time in all of child development. And I think that a story that you were telling before we started recording and got on, just about how, actually no, I think this was, we were talking, those of you listening, we were having a great conversation before too. But when you were young, wanting you to be normal, that's what you were talking about in your introduction. It doesn't matter, parents listening, if you want your kids to be gifted or not. Your kids are who they are. And so our job is to help them be the best versions of themselves, right? Without doubting that, without squelching that, but also with regards to supporting it. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of like that tug in there, right? Between the nurture and the nature and the we need to support our kids, because a gifted kid isn't just a smart kid, right? There's so many layers to it. And if we're not supporting them where they are, there are other things that can happen down the road. So it's so important to see the kid that's in front of us and be there for that particular kid.
And it's interesting because before we started recording, you asked about the personality sheet, and you've
Yeah,
just given me an opportunity.
here we go.
Okay. So, like with my first two children, they were differently gifted, and one had a personality type, and theirs have fluctuated very little over their lives. And I can talk more about how anybody can fluctuate as they grow and learn and try and fit in or not fit in. But my first one had a J judging profile. And that's the fourth letter and they tend to be pretty dutiful about doing the work, whether it fits them or not. P perceivers, on the other hand, which is what two of my kids were, uh, he are more open to, well, this is stupid, I'm not going to do it. And you can't entice them with a grade. And they would rather just not do it. And so my second one was far more like that. And he got to school and within a week said, frankly, Mom, it just takes so much of my time. And that was kindergarten. And I thought, okay, can you sit still there for a while? Because I had a baby by then. And the personalities will have a lot to do with how you deliver what they need. That's my point. And I'm more of a perceiver now, which means I sometimes go down rabbit holes more than I did when I had to be the one in charge.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, for instance, if you've got a partner who is a very perceiving type, they may not follow schedules. They may not do those things that require schedules and planning. And sometimes we switch as a result of needing to get something done. And during my J years, I was very, very organized. And so mothers at home, especially, or if you're working and doing most of the parenting, it can turn you into, whether you're a mother or a father, somebody who is more, we need a schedule here. And so that's an important thing to look at when you are deciding how to do your services to each of your children. And you have, of course, it helps to have intuition,
Mm-hmm.
but not everyone does. It's not the other side of the continuum in that. See, in my first book, I knew this stuff, but my publisher wouldn't let me use it.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that earlier with
Yeah,
regards to being able to put the stuff that you want into a book sometimes comes down to whether you're self-publishing or not. That's one of the reasons I love podcasting and writing on a blog or a website is you can write. And the downside to that, right, is there's a lot of stuff out there that you shouldn't be writing because
right. And the thing is, my first book was long enough, and he was right because of the length. The one I self-published got to be 3 times as big. And
yeah,
so I'm
which is a good time, real quick, to bring up that. So the two books that Deborah's referencing, the 5 Levels of Gifted and then the 5 Levels of Gifted Grown Up, both phenomenal books. She is working right now on revising them into smaller bite-sized books, a trilogy where you can pick up the age level and the area that you need the most. And so
yeah.
watch for that to start releasing in October. And we'll put links in the show notes for this. But yeah, okay, go ahead.
And it isn't by age level.
Oh,
It's
okay.
yeah. The first one is about the relativity of it
Oh,
and
gotcha.
the journey of the kids throughout their schooling and entering their careers. And the middle one is about the parenting aspects, and the personalities are introduced and the psychology of it all, theories of development. And then the last one is the words of the grown-up subjects on a myriad of topics. And each of those little books will be standalone.
Mhm.
And in fact, the big book included making standalone sections because no one was going to be able to remember what they learned 400 pages ago.
No, I love that. I love that breakdown too.
Okay, but the personalities are always behind my saying it depends.
Hmm.
And when we are coming up with how to support our children, very strong extroverts don't want to be homeschooled compared to introverts. Introverts are like, fine, get these people out of my way. And the extroverts still want to have buddies. So what's important is they could be more expensive because you might have to come up with some solutions that send them to a school with more people like them. And if they have a passion for learning, uh, they're extroverts. If no one else is like them and they are exceptionally to profoundly gifted, it's harder to meet that child's needs. And sometimes if they, well, there was there's some kids in my first book and second book in the level 5 who were, one was an extrovert, one was an introvert, and the extrovert really made it work because his parents got out of his way. In the school district, he was so persuasive to the school district himself that he went through the public schools. But oddly, they kept being in different grades and doing different activities, and they let him
Hmm.
because they talk a good game, an extroverted, profoundly gifted child. And yeah, there's a lot that you have to have intuition for.
Hmm.
And if you don't have the intuition yourself, talking to someone like Colleen or me is a good idea because we're steeped in it.
Right.
And it does make it, and Jim Delisle, that's one of the gifts he has. He knows pretty quickly what we're dealing with.
So, if you've been a listener of the podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about CTC Math for the last couple of years. They have been supportive sponsors of the podcast, and as I've told you before, I'm a customer. My kids use CTC Math in their homeschool. I am a paying subscriber and have been for a number of years, even before CTC sponsored the podcast. I am a raving fan, and I will continue talking about their resources and their program until long after I'm done homeschooling, because I think it's really versatile for so many different types of families, whether your kids are super strong in an area or super weak in an area of math. It allows you to customize their education when it comes to math. I've talked to so many families over the years, but I want to share with you a message that I received from Sandy, a longtime listener who was content in what they were using until, again, they weren't, and they switched over to CTC Math based on a recommendation that they'd heard on the podcast. Sandy writes, "We too started using CTC Math following your recommendation, Colleen. One of my sons is so dedicated. Then, after watching over his shoulder, my other son started using it too. They both now do an hour each workday by choice. I even enjoy it myself. I do the lessons with them, which is a handy brush up, and will occasionally do some of the algebra lessons ahead of time. Math was not my strong suit in school, but now I love it, and I wish the program had been available in the 80s. Too many people think they're terrible at math, but I truly believe we all just need a method of learning that suits us. CTC Math seems to work for all three of us." So check out ctcmath.com or go to the link over in the show notes for this episode and click on it to go over there and see the offer that they have for podcast listeners. You don't have to just take my word for it. You can take Sandy's as well. CTC is a great program and could be a wonderful benefit for your homeschool. All right, let's get back to today's episode. And like you said, the levels of their giftedness, the differences in their personalities, all through the whole 4 letters or whatever of the Myers-Briggs, it all comes into play, which is why whenever anyone asks me about gifted, and I'm sure you have similar answers, my answer is always, if you've met one gifted kid or adult, you've met one, because they're so different. I think actually and anecdotally, they're more different from each other than they are from the general population, because there's so much skewing within there. My oldest, and the reason we started homeschooling in the first place, we pulled him out in the middle of first grade. He is probably the most extroverted extrovert I have ever met in my entire life, but he is also one of those people who will not do something if he cannot see the value of it. So regardless of, he was not willing to do things just to stay in the school system with his friends. Yeah. He needed the freedom. And like you mentioned, I love that you said his parents got out of his way. That, I felt, was my role in his entire homeschooling experience, was to help him find the opportunities, put the opportunities in his path, and then get out of the way so he could take his deep dives. And now as an adult, he's still living at home because he's freelancing. He freelanced as a podcast editor, an audio engineer, a video editor, a special effects editor.
Handy for you.
What's that?
How handy for you.
Yeah, it's great. He does a couple of things for me. He doesn't do a lot for me, though, unfortunately, because he doesn't love my topic as much as the race car YouTube channels he edits for and stuff like that. But on top of that, he started teaching in the last 2 years at a filmmakers academy in our area, where he took classes when he was young. He started teaching their special effects section. So now he's working with teens and can see how to let those who geek out over special effects geek out over special effects. So if we figure out who the kid in front of us is and what they need, then we can fit them where they need to be and give them those opportunities.
And I want to add, most of the kids in the book, their parents worked with me, and not forever, because I don't like to deal with that. But I say, okay, do you understand? But I'm the permission person.
Yes.
And so what happened with that one person, he was 5 when I met him. And his father actually helped me create the online IQ tests that I had for a while, but I couldn't afford to keep it up because anyway, but it worked. And I went to his wedding last year.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah. But what happened was I told his parents, don't worry. He knows what you can check in with me anytime. And it was a safety net for them to know that it was okay to let him do it this way. It didn't need to be traditional. And one of the other things that happens is the kids in levels 4 and 5 often don't have regular careers. So get over it, people.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past. My husband and I talk about that often, actually, because my husband's very bright, but he's very much tell me what needs to be done, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it better than anybody else can do it. But I need the direction to get started, and those were the conversations we had early on as we were figuring out our son. It was more about me coaching him on it's going to be okay. It looks different, and then allowing him to mourn what he thought parenting was going to look like. And he doesn't have the same types of friendships that you had. He doesn't have the same types of desires or experiences or wants. He doesn't want a job that he goes into every day and knows what he's going to be doing. He likes the novelty of what assignment or what project am I working on this day or at this moment. And I think that's important for us too. Like you said, finding someone, and it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be you, but find someone that can coach you or counsel you or work with you on your kids. It's why I offer a limited amount of coaching calls a month, because I want to come alongside of you and give you the permission to
Yeah.
know the kid you have. But it's not about telling you how to parent your kid or teach your kid, because every one of our kids, if they are quirky in this way, are going to be different from one another.
Plus, I never notice when people have what we call neurodiversity 2E qualities because to me, they're my peeps.
Yes.
And it's like, why is this a problem? Yeah, but that's where homeschooling also can come in.
Hmm.
And that's where any of us emanating from the homeschooling it doesn't mean you're necessarily the teacher all the time.
You can't be.
It means you've freed them up. You freed them up to go in the directions they're ready for. And then
Absolutely.
you help set up those directions.
Yeah, I love that. Can you tell, just for those listening who have maybe not picked up any of your work yet, and I'm not going to quiz you on cutoffs and stuff like that, but can you just give an overall, what are the 5 levels you and I keep referencing?
Okay, here's an interesting statistic to start with. The average IQ, first of all, tests have different score
Hmm.
formats, and there are still people out there who are referring to formats that are antiquated.
Yes.
And it drives me nuts because I majored in test and measurement. And I've done the normative sampling for the gifted for 4 IQ tests among the Stanford, Benes, and Wechsler tests. And they only go to 150. And anything that goes beyond that is contrived and doesn't always work that anyway. So it isn't about the scores, although the scores are important.
Great.
So the average IQ of people who go to college in this country is 115. And so 120 is about the start of the kind of kids who will be put into programs back in the days when they tracked. That meant they were not only going to go to college, probably, but they needed class structure than the kids who were in the middle section or the lower section. We got rid of that. And sadly, the person who helped to get rid of that, she didn't mean that. What they did was not what she meant. And I'm always missing her name up with someone else. But she really tried to set that clear. But people created middle schools instead of junior highs.
Mhm.
And we got rid of the scaffolding process that was the go between. And now people think that kids in the middle school years are just in social stuff and they don't really learn the same way as they have before. And that's not true. So we're dealing with lots of reasons why maybe you take your child out of school for a while
Mhm.
but give them a chance for a social life if they want it.
Right.
And don't put your own values on it. They may want it more, but they're thinking you think they're more smart if they don't like other people. I just happen to know some people who do that. And their kid isn't really an introvert. He wants friends. Anyway, so what happened was I realized I had to include the people who didn't get into gifted programs because gifted programs have a highly gifted cutoff in most cases. And there are people who can do amazing things, including PhDs and inventions and so on, who aren't above 130. So the truth is, we run out of test when 133 on the tests is the start of the 99th percentile. So from 133 on, everybody in the 99th percentile looks like they're the same. They're not.
Right.
And if you have a 1 to 150 on the tests they give in school, it's usually like the Otis Lennon or or the OLSAT.
Yeah.
And if they give that, they go up to 150. And they are proctored by people who don't always give the best directions. And one of my sons had to take it for this one school, and he had already finished third grade by fourth grade, by 4-year-old. And he was, well, yeah, you're a pushy mother. No, I wasn't.
Right.
But they wanted to give him the test, and there were other kids trying to get into the school. And he took it literally, and I figured it out because he scored under 130. And I said, this is not true. This is not right. And I discovered, I said, okay, now, did the person who told you about this, did she say, if there's anything you don't understand, you can just skip it? Yeah, I did. I skipped a section. Okay. But anyway, they found out they'd made a mistake because he was far and away unlike any of the teachers had ever seen. But as luck would have it, there was another boy in his kindergarten class who he would not have been in the same class had he had a better test result. And they are still close friends. They've both been best men for each other's weddings. So, things work out. And anyway, I'm talking about the levels again
Right.
because I created the levels after my experience as a teacher and a parent. My kids were grown up when that book came out. So then I got into level 2, which is the highly gifted, and they still aren't as going to have as many problems in their school. However, if they live in a real or rural or isolated area, a lot of smart families have already moved, especially smart families who know they're smart families. There are lots of smart people who don't know they're smart people.
Yes.
And so there is often the uncut diamonds out there where you least expect them
Mm-hmm.
because it's about access as well, whether you show up as gifted. It's like street smarts when you don't have access. It's if you're poor, you have to work the system. That's still gifted, but bitter is not good.
No.
Yeah. So anyway, so level 2 is still usually not an outlier kind of person, but they do need something more than the rest of the class. Level 3, 4, and 5 all really need something different. The threes still are not in as much danger of truly imploding, but they need something. And different people with different personalities do more self-evaluation. And when they're evaluating themselves or their parents, or if they've got the wrong blend of personalities between their parents and them, and the viewpoints their parents have, and the kid is coming up with on his or her own, it becomes a battle of wills. And the parents may want the child to buckle down and get good grades. And they have a child who doesn't have that kind of view.
Right.
Okay, levels 4 and 5. 4 just means they're either extraordinarily high in a couple things. And again, that starts at the upper 130s. And they're either extraordinarily good at a couple things, which won't necessarily show up on the final score of the IQ test. You've got to look at the parts of the test, which of course I've got a lot of familiarity with.
Right.
Unlike a lot of licensed psychologists who have not gotten the background, but because they've passed the gatekeeping barriers, they get to give those tests whether they've got the background in it or not. And I say that because I got challenged constantly. My state doesn't require a psychology license, and I have more coursework in psychology than most people who get that. And I actually tried to get that, but no one understood what I was trying to do, so I couldn't get somebody to cover me for a year. And I
Indeed.
was already in my 50s, and I'm thinking, oh, time's a waste in here.
It's funny. I had a conversation just the other day with my oldest son about going to school for fun as you get older. And I have so much research and coursework on child psychology and the brain and cognitive abilities and things like that, that I probably have the equivalent of at least a family therapist license or whatever, but I just don't want to jump through the hoops. But I still want to take classes for fun. And then there's this environmental science class that looks a little fun. And just that idea of being lifelong learners and doing
Exactly.
that.
That's your, don't you have something like that?
Yeah, that's my site name. But just that it's good to want to do that too. You don't necessarily need the degree, but it is frustrating when you have all this knowledge, but you don't have that set of letters. You have a different set of letters. And
Right. And this is a gatekeeping process that is unfortunate because in this field, you have to get older and wiser before it even occurs to you you might be able to do something in that area.
right.
And however, the smarter you are, the higher your overall intellectual functioning after you get all the therapy you need for what already happened. Uh, you can get a lot done anyway, as
Mhm.
I said. And I like to really make this clear to people. I was in my 50s when I finished my dissertation, which was on, it was a longitudinal study on highly gifted adults and their self-actualization journey. And I'll give it to people free anytime. I've got a link. And it had 42 subjects after I'd realized how old you are matters. You can only get so far at different stages of age because you need experience, you need time to sit back and say, well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And so that is the older group, and they're
Mhm.
my age mates. And they were, a lot of them had to be talked into being in it because they weren't gifted. They were, and I could tell. So I gave them a way to prove it, but I didn't really care. I knew. So then level 5 means they're even all across the board. They have a high score and they all across the board. And they're unfortunately, when one of those is in your group or your school or whatever, everybody thinks that's what gifted is. And they start discounting their own intelligence or their child's intelligence because they think, oh, no, that person's gifted. And there's a whole range of gifted. That's what I was trying to show. And the most interesting part, which I still can picture it, is I wrote down the early milestones of all the people who were going to be in my book. And some of them, it's always more than you start with. And I wrote down everything they did at age 1 to 3 months, not 1 to 3 months, 0 to 3 months, and
Mhm.
so on. And as I did that, I wrote it on note cards. And then I went to visit my parents and I'd sit on the floor and put all the note cards out and I kept reshuffling them and to see, okay, so how do I come up with what level they're in? And that's really how I created that.
That's amazing. I just love the image of having that all spread out and figuring out where it fits in. But it's so helpful to be able to take those examples and those anecdotes and those traits and milestones, like you said, and try to figure out, use it to help you figure out how best to meet the needs of the kids that you have in front of you. Because you and I were talking again before this just about like test scores and getting identifications and things like that. And it's not the be all end all. The number is not. You've got to figure out all those other aspects of it. Jim used to say in our classes that there was an optimal range of giftedness. And that sounds like between your 2 and 3, where they're smart enough to get everything that comes to them, but still self aware enough and willing enough to get along and fit in to be able to fit in successfully anywhere they go. And then you start to get into those other levels and you have all the same intelligence challenges and motivational challenges, but then you have these characteristics and personality traits and asynchrony that comes in too. And so having this to guide you is just, it's so much more inclusive of the person who's in front of you than just a score.
Oh, and some people really fixate on scores
Mm-hmm.
and tell them you're, people have asked me if I can make a test that shows who's the smartest person. I said, no, stop it. No, there's no point in that because you have good days and bad days.
Right.
We all have our inner parts that feel differently. Sometimes we're really sharp, sometimes we're not. And how do you measure that?
Hmm. Yeah. And what's the point of measuring that, right? Because
Exactly.
it doesn't actually do anything for that person. My
Mhm.
son, I've talked a lot about my oldest here in this episode, but my son just got back from a trip. He met several, like a lot of profoundly gifted individuals do, meet people from all walks of life, right? Through random conversations. And this was through gaming online when he was in high school. And he's got a friend who goes to Virginia Tech, a friend who goes to Cornell, a friend who goes to MIT. And this weekend was the only time all of these young adults could converge at one of their houses in Virginia to get together before they all go back to school. And so he was telling me, he was sitting down telling me about what he did. Okay, so we're talking about 21, 22, and 23-year-olds, right? You'd picture typically them hanging around with a beer and just whatever they're doing, going out to dance or whatever. No, they were having a conversation over dinner one night and wanted to see if they could accelerate rusting on cars or stop it. And so they're like, how do we force this to happen? And one of the guys was like, I know somebody. And he gets on the phone, he calls somebody who's going for his PhD in organic chemistry, and they worked out how to extract hydrochloric acid from toilet bowl cleaners so they could accelerate rust in screws. And they went and bought new screws and had a control group and a group with traditional agent and a group with the stripped toilet bowl cleaner and watched the rust happen in front of them and took pictures and sent them home. Like, that is not the typical kid we're talking about, and a score is not going to help you with that. But how interesting are those people to be around? And they find each other and bounce ideas off of one another. Knowing a score is not going to help you meet those kids' needs, right? Getting out of their way, letting them discover, and supporting their discoveries is what's going to help you with those kids.
Yeah. And one of my kids has been, the youngest one has always been a gamer.
Mhm.
I didn't realize maybe I should limit his time because it was so new, but I did limit his temper. I said, you can't throw the controller, and if you start yelling, you're going to have to ride your bike until you calm down. Uh, but I've got the teacher way of talking anyway.
Right.
Yeah, it's his gaming friends. Some of them he's never met in person, but they're really close. And it really is amazing to see these connections, but the networking that can go on. And this is all about, keep this in mind if you do any homeschooling. You still want to bring other people in and have other ways of having groups and so on, so they can find the people. You can't force it, but
Right.
you've got to set up these opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that for those of you parents who are listening who maybe are new to homeschooling, the difference now from where it was, I know for me, this is my 16th year of homeschooling, and I have to say no to so much because there are so many good opportunities. When I first started homeschooling, we found other people by um, the most pervasive suggestion for how to find other homeschoolers was to go to the library during school hours. And if you saw school age children, those were likely homeschoolers and you could make connections. And because there weren't all these online forums and it was just starting and blogs were new, podcasting was emerging and Instagram wasn't even in existence when I started.
We didn't have
Right.
computers.
It's
My, my
so
kids
the
were born in
difference
the
is
70s and 80s.
right. Learning all of this now, doing it, you have to say yes to the best things and the things that fit your kid, which comes back to knowing your kid, right? And I think that we're so fortunate to be choosing to meet our kids' needs in a time where there are so many opportunities out there and you can be intentional about the ones that you choose so that they fit your kids best and not jump into something just for the sake of jumping in. And you're also able to say no. We were part of a group for a while that just didn't get our kids. And in the past, we would have had to stick with that group simply because there just weren't very many groups around for homeschoolers. But now there are so many choices that you can find somewhere that your kid fits. All right, we've been talking for a while, and I think we could go on, and maybe we'll make a plan to have you back once all three of your books are out, so we can talk about those specifically.
Good idea.
But this has been such a great conversation. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is one thing maybe that we didn't talk about that you would want to leave listeners with before they go? What would be your parting piece for them to know as they're going from this episode, to look at the kids that they have at home and see what they can do for them?
I guess one of the biggest hurdles is recognizing when you really should make sure they do it, and recognizing when you should say, this isn't working, let's move on to something else. The line between those two is important. And in teaching in a classroom, I found that, and in working with my children, I found that.
Yeah, that's good.
I think everybody should learn to be a good writer. I'm not so concerned about spelling, things like that.
Yeah. And writing, I had this conversation recently with a coaching client. Writing and handwriting are two different things.
Oh, yeah.
So I know that so many homeschooling parents in particular get caught up in the physicality of the writing, but a good writer is able to communicate ideas. My oldest is a tremendous writer. He's got terrible handwriting. He has little to no stamina when it comes to putting pen to paper, but he can dictate, and then he can go in and edit all of the dictation.
Right.
And present beautiful essays and works of writing. Absolutely. Being able to articulate ideas through the written word is crucial.
And so that's uppermost. Also, memorization is not as important as connecting the information and knowing how to communicate it.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially because those of you who are listening, we've had to reschedule a couple times. Tornadoes taking down my power and internet, among other things. So I really appreciate your flexibility and your time. Where can people find you online if they wanted to look up your work?
I have a website, but I don't know how long I'll keep it.
Okay.
I'm 75.
Yeah.
Okay. It's called 5 Levels of Gifted. Okay. And you spell out the words, 5levelsofgifted.com. And then I'm on Substack, and that's where I just release things in bite-sized pieces.
Perfect. I will link to those.
The lifespan. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll link to those in the show notes, and you can find her work on Amazon and bookshops. Make sure that you look her up when you come back and visit. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
All right. For those of you listening, we'll be back next week, same time, same place, with another episode. You can find all the links to the things that Deborah, Dr. Ruff, and I talked about here on this episode, as well as links to her to find her online. So go head over to the show notes at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcasts and check out our sponsors. We really appreciate the support that they give to homeschooling families, Lexercise and CTC Math. And I just hope that you take this week to look at the kids that you have in front of you, love on them, appreciate their interesting quirks and personalities and creativity and intelligence, and just enjoy the adventure of parenting these special kids. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.